Ladies and gentlemen, tonight's performance will include paper cuts, complex hands, and the effort that goes into being effortless as we discuss cut paper with Righteous Robot's own Julian Curi here on Created Things.
Hello, everybody. Good morning, good evening, good night. It's Created Things, the only podcast proudly sponsored by folding paper, cutting paper, doing things with paper, being essentially paper thin. I'm your host, Dominican priest, medievalist, one of them in training, one of them not, Father Gabriel Toretta. With me is my also host, artist, psychotherapist, guy living in Florida, Jacob Flores Popchick. How you doing?
I'm well. You say paper thin. I wish that were the case. I feel like I'm decreasingly so.
Hey, listen, after the pandemic, everyone has complete freedom to just say, like, as far as I can tell, forever, oh, well, it was lockdown weight. You know, it's just like, no, I mean, you should have seen me before the pandemic. I actually had a 24 pack, which is like a 6-pack, but then a whole bunch of them. And they don't come from drinking beer. It has nothing to do with that. Why would you even? How dare you? Anyway, so it doesn't really matter. This is the thing. Yeah,
it does not really matter. It does not really matter.
Yeah.
But yeah, also the baby thing. Having a baby, you end up just starting to store weight like a bear.
Yeah, like, well, you had a baby like in the penumbra of the, well, your wife had a baby in the penumbra of the pandemic.
No,
which means,
I did. It was an Arnold Schwarzenegger type.
Yeah,
situation.
It was a whole thing. Yeah, exactly right. So that's how it is. And that makes it harder.
Were you referencing with good morning, good afternoon, good night? Was that? I've
been thinking about the Truman Show lately. It's definitely on my mind. It's definitely on my mind. I've been thinking about the Truman Show lately. I mean, it's a really good movie. I don't know why, in particular, like late 90s, early 2000s work of like observational fiction and like philosophical fiction is like on my mind. But maybe it's all the cameras installed in my room. I don't really know, but I don't really know. I mean, I feel like, I mean, if I started telling you about them, you would think, oh, this guy has like paranoid psychosis, which I don't, because if somebody actually is filming your every move and reporting it to the government, that's just, I'm just talking, you know, I'm just telling things the way that they are.
As fellow psychotherapists often say, just because you're paranoid doesn't mean they're not out to get you.
Yeah, which they probably are. So yeah, exactly. But I did have, I admit, I did have reasons for talking about paper at the beginning. You might have thought, did this man just want to start talking about paper?
I assumed it wasn't completely arbitrary.
Yeah. It was not completely arbitrary. I mean, there were many nouns I could have chosen to speak about arbitrarily. Whales, for instance, small intestines. These are some random nouns, you know? Is a random,
all of which I'd love to do episodes on.
Yeah, exactly. There's a random epithet. I was reading this German novel published in 1930 yesterday, and I discovered that that there's this incredible sort of like expression of either dismay and anger or of like wonder, depending. Kreuzertürken, which is exactly as much fun as it sounds. Kreuzertürken, and it's a portmanteau, which is where you take two words and jam them together. It's a portmanteau of crucifix and Turk. And it comes from...
I was just gonna say, I bet that a German novel published in the 1930s is totally devoid of any problematic content.
Well, this was actually
totally safe read.
Yeah, right. No, I mean, this is a novel written by a man of Hungarian descent who wrote in German and was a major dissenter. And he died in 1938. But like anyway, he's an amazing man who was a really courageous novelist and stuff. But no, it's a portmanteau of crucifix and Turk, and it started in Austria in like apropos of the Turkish unpleasantness in the 16th and 17th century, and I have no idea what it's supposed to mean, but there it is. It's just two words jammed together, and they're absolutely charming. Anyway, listen, speaking of things jammed together that are absolutely charming, I want I want to talk about.
We're interviewing a centaur today.
We are. Yeah, we are. I want to bring in our host. I want to bring in our guest. Jacob, you want to give us a quick intro here?
Yeah, so you know, we've been wanting to get this guy for a little while on the podcast. You know, you talk about cool things jammed together. If they're name an art form, and he's probably excelling at it and making everyone jealous as he does so. You can check him out through his studio, Righteous Robot. Everybody, please welcome my friend, our colleague, Julian Curi. How you doing, Julian?
I'm doing very, very well. Thank you for having me. This is my first podcast, so go easy on me.
Oh my gosh,
seriously?
Fantastic. This is amazing. Yeah. Well, I should have warned you then, I guess maybe in advance, that like this is actually a strip podcast. So after every successful joke, you know, the other people have to either take off or put on clothing. You know, it's a little complicated, but I feel like we just want you to be comfortable, you know, in the ways that you can be most comfortable.
For once, it's quite cold here in Los Angeles. It is not sunny Los Angeles. It is rainy deluge Los Angeles. So
wow, that's
that
good.
Clothes rule will not work out well.
Oh gosh, wow. Okay, well, this is going to be a short interview, but it's okay. Okay, we'll make it work. Listen, we'll make an exception for this time.
You can introduce our listeners a little bit more to what you do exactly by way of this cool background that you have.
Sure. Yes, it does include sort of an array of things. So I'm a filmmaker in Los Angeles. I've dabbled in many different art forms, and I think that's why I'm in film, because that really combines everything. Photography, for me, it combines fine art, illustration, lighting, music, acting, and I love it. It's definitely my favorite art medium. And but I started out just as a kid loving illustration and fine art, sketching, painting, etc. Was trained here and there with it, but it wasn't really until like high school and college that I actually got the acting bug. But thanks to my college, Franciscan University, not really having a focused drama program, it was just, you know, you get a wide array of education, be that stagecraft, directing, acting, design. Then I got the directing bug, and I think just that aspect of world building was what really struck, and that's always attracted me in storytelling, is world building. I'm not really into doing contemporary modern stuff. I love time period stuff. I love sci-fi. I love fantasy, anything that takes me somewhere else. And I've really been able to apply that kind of fine art background to it by making my own props, making my own set pieces and whatnot. So that's why the paints and everything are here, because I make almost everything myself. And then recently I've been dabbling in, I don't know if there's really a name for it exactly. I'm doing animation. I'm willing to call it animation, but it's not quite stop motion. It's blending puppetry and digital compositing to create a fully practical, physical animated film. That's what I'm doing.
And that's why we were especially excited to talk to you, because, you know, one of the missions of this podcast is to try to really put a spotlight on more obscure art forms and more kind of diverse artists from the periphery and things. And, you know, I got to say, I mean, I've been an admirer of your short films for a really, really long time.
Thank you.
You mentioned how you're painting things. I mean, you're really a terrific fabricator. It's, I mean, on just that level. If you were just doing fabrication, I'd be really impressed. And anybody who wants to see some of the things, the things from times gone by that he's sort of created out of trash cans and spray paint inexplicably, you should check out the Righteous Robot Instagram. But when you shifted into the cut paper animation as a medium, that's when I was really like, oh shit, this is going to be an amazing conversation, because that's the kind of niche stuff that we kind of obsess over. So talk to us about what pivoted you from more traditional filmmaking into using this incredibly
fragile, incredibly painstaking, time-intensive medium as, I guess, for the time being, your primary medium.
It looks like for the foreseeable future, but we'll get to that.
Cool. Yeah, good.
You know, I wish it was a more romantic discovery, and like that I had this great story of, oh, I just started folding paper and that was it. Like any freelance anything, I was hungry for a gig, and there was a documentary series, a short documentary series that was being made on a renowned Bulgarian photographer named Jacko Vasilev. Does incredible black and white photography, has incredible life stories and incredible stories behind every single photograph. And he was interviewed, and since he sort of escaped from this communist regime, he was put into labor camps at times, his father was put into a labor camp, but he just has incredible stories, but his photographs are what tell the stories, and there isn't really any footage that could go with it. So I was asked, what could we do to help illustrate this story? And I thought, well, I can draw, I can make movies. Surely I can learn to be an animator overnight to get this job.
Well, I mean, why not? I think anybody, sure.
12 drawings a second, 24 if I want to be fancy, 60 seconds in a minute. Yeah, this isn't going to happen. Who am I kidding about? It's like, I don't have the time. They don't have the budget. So I don't know. I was just Googling like black and white animated art forms, and I stumbled on the filmmaking of the German artist Lotte Reiniger, who did stop motion out of these shadow puppets. They're all in silhouette, and just beautiful work. And I'm like, well, the stop motion is pretty tedious, and again, the freelancer thing kicking in, that's like, I got to wrap this job quick so I can move on to the next one. I don't really have the time to luxuriate in this. So I pitched this idea of like, hey, what if I do like these silhouettes and the camera is the only thing that moves, and maybe from cut to cut the poses change and your brain can kind of stitch what happened in between. And they went for it, and it sounds so simplistic, but I found it to be very effective, and I could use my skills in lighting and set design to build sets, to do buildings, to build classrooms, like all these different environments that his stories took place in, all made out of like a thicker cardstock watercolor paper in white. And then the figures were in silhouetted black. And there was just this real texture, like nothing on camera was fake. It was just... And it wasn't like filming a toy set either. And that was a concern of mine of like, well, I don't really want it to look like I'm just filming dolls. There's a real artistic quality to it. And I think a natural evolution from that Reiniger style. And it worked. And I put those away in the basement. They were packed away. And that was it. I did the gig, moved on to other things. Then the pandemic happened, and my wife and I were making short films, just the two of us in our home, and had a blast doing that. But I didn't know how long that thing was going to go for. And I'm like, there's only so many stories I can come up with two people in the same house. And a competition, Adobe was holding a competition they partnered with the DJ Marshmello and Halsey to make a 30-second video of how you show kindness in the world. This was in the pandemic, and people couldn't really film too much. They couldn't go out and film a lot. And I'm like, okay, obviously I have film equipment. We can do something, but like, we aren't the ones giving cookies to our mailman and all that stuff. And all that was great, or giving pizza to the homeless. And I'm like, and I was watching submissions coming in, and I'm like, yeah, this is beautiful. I love how kindness is being spread, but it's not good filmmaking, if you know what I mean. Right. So I'm like, what do we have at our disposal? I've got all that stuff from that documentary series in the basement. So literally dusted them off. And I'm like, okay, I have some buildings. I have a little like classroom set. I've got a couple trees. If I just make new characters, which was easy enough just to make like little silhouettes, and created this through line of the kind of design pitch for that song, for that collaboration between Marshmello and Halsey, was a lot of yellow flowers. And they gave you those assets. They gave you fonts, they gave you designs, they gave you colors. And I'm like, I need to treat this like a job. Like someone gave me these assets and said, make a music video from that. And I did. So I told the story of like a yellow flower that kind of passes along through different kinds of people and different worlds. 30 seconds, filmed it in 2 days, edited it real quick, and we ended up winning the competition and got put into their music video for it. And that's when I started thinking, maybe there's something. And a lot of people were like, oh, I thought that was all digital. Like, I thought you made that in After Effects or something. And I was really proud to say, like, no, it's 100% in camera. Like, that's real lighting, that's real texture. And so it was really after that, again, just so non-romantic, just like, hey, one gig leads to another. Like, how do I capitalize on this? Like, a lot of people wanted more. And then that's kind of when I started experimenting and iterating, like, how can I make them move now? I think I've capped off like the whole camera movement thing. How can I make them emote? How can I make them blink? How can I make them talk? So I wrote a short film. It's called Gruff. It's based on kind of my experiences with my dad before he passed away. That sounds really sad and a downer, but it's ultimately a story about love and how to live with and interact with someone who is not very verbal about their love, who definitely does have it, but is not as communicative. And I mean, I'm Hispanic. My dad was Mexican, but from what I hear, this is a very universal thing with dads, any culture. It's just that kind of, and it's a generational thing too, that gruffness, and how to really emotionally connect with someone like that. So I got the script and started on this journey that I'm still in the middle of right now, to finishing this short film that is in full color, has full texture. The characters can talk, the characters can move, and I'm digitally removing the wires or puppet rods to it so that it looks like a 2D animated film, but is really 3D, fully physical, fully practical. I guess you could call it 2.5D. So then I just started posting about it on TikTok and Instagram, and it just blew up. Like, nobody had ever seen anything like that. I'm like, I've been working on this the last couple of years. This is not a surprise. This is not new to me, but posting it, I was like, oh, wow, people really haven't seen something like this. It's really like, people want to see more. So I started posting more behind the scenes. And then a friend of mine talked me into starting a GoFundMe to finish the film, because it was a personal project. No one's been paying me to work on this. I've been taking side gigs all throughout, but that GoFundMe has ended up doing really well. And I'm planning on taking the next few months, maybe 5 or 6, to finish that short film and share it with you all.
It's phenomenal. You've touched. I mean, so there's a lot there for us to unpack. But like,
yeah, sorry, that was really long.
No, that's exactly what we want. That's fantastic. I just saying. I think the first maybe thread I want to pull on is actually because you pressed on exactly a button that I had designed for myself and really wanted to ask, which is that. Because I was trying to think of like similar things, relatively similar things to your work that I've seen. And, everything I was coming up with was like various forms of stop motion, so either like, the kind of claymation Christmas specials from like when I was a kid or like whatever early South Park episodes, obviously, because like we're talking paper here.
Exactly.
But then as I was thinking more about it, I was realizing like, I actually can't think of, I can't think of anything I've seen that's this sort of like fully modeled, fully like what you're saying, this sort of fully realized physical world that is like filmed with the camera in motion, but the paper still being essentially paper moving as paper does, just augmented by like advanced puppetry techniques, basically, in part. But I guess I just want to press on that a little bit more, which is like, to what extent is there a heritage here that you feel like you're drawing on, or that you are there other people's knowledge that you're borrowing from that you can use, or are you forging every tool to strike every blow on the anvil, or where are you?
It's funny that what was that word of like the mashing up of two things that you said earlier?
Portmanteau.
Portmanteau, okay. Yeah.
Does that only apply to words? Like when you mash two words together, or can that be ideas and practices?
It can be ideas. Yeah.
Okay.
All kinds of stuff.
I think that's really my bread and butter in art in general. Like I love the concept of the mashup. I think that's where the best art really happens. Be it music, be it food, chicken waffles. Yes. Country
Mexican
rap.
Chinese food, which is a big big deal in New York City. Mexican Chinese food. I think I don't understand this, but there it is.
In LA too.
Okay, yeah, sure.
And I think that with any art form, when you just start playing with that and it's like alchemy, like something totally new is really going to happen. And I love doing that. So I don't necessarily attribute anything I do to, I'm somebody who's mashing things together. I didn't invent puppetry. I didn't invent paper art. But I think that I'm combining things that haven't been combined to this level before, mainly using, digital compositing to create something that is not, dare I say, embracing its, how do I say this? A lot of practical filmmaking, there's a jank to it, or to the stop motion, and it's cute because of that. It's like, oh, they're really like sticky as they kind of move around. And it's like, well,
or I remember like Aardman talking a lot about how they would intentionally leave the thumbprints on Wallace and Gromit and stuff to give it that tactility.
Oh,
and things.
wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And I think as audiences, we, I think that the fingerprints are totally an aesthetic decision, and I love that and I appreciate it. But and they're a major studio, but I've been to a lot of film festivals where there's animated films, and there's like a kind of forgiveness, or you kind of like give them a lot of slack because it's like, oh, you like hand drew all this, like, I mean, it kind of looks like shit. But but you like, look at you drew this, so like let's applaud that. And like, I don't know, man, I have way higher standards. It's like, well, that's beautiful. I'm glad you did the thing. I'm glad you drew this, or like, you made something with the Play-Doh. I get it, but I'm always striving for that like clean sheen. We're competing animation wise with, everyone's used to the 3D Disney models, this computer generated stuff. And so if I'm going to go into practical filmmaking, I really have to bring in that state of the art stuff. Like I need to shoot this on really good cameras. I need to have very crisp, beautiful lighting. And so, shadow puppetry has been around for hundreds, if not thousands of years. So that's not new, but I'm removing the puppet rods. Again, that's not new. A lot of the Jim Henson stuff has done that recently, like with that Dark Crystal movie on Netflix. But sure, you say the word puppet and people think, yeah, it's Sesame Street, or it's just like that sort of thing. And I'm like, okay, how can I evolve that? How can I push past that preconceived notion of that word? Paper puppets or paper dolls, and make something that is very tangible and layered and textured and unique. So another long-winded answer to a very simple question. I'm not inventing anything. No. I'm just trying to push my standards, and I'm trying to push the standards of viewers to be like, you can expect more from handmade animated films. They don't have to be, and mine are a little janky too, but there's a bit of that I embrace, but like it can be excellent. Like we can continue iterating. Just because computers are around doesn't mean everything has to look like that. We can keep pushing this medium.
Well, and there is an element to, I think, every person's art where they have to embrace their own unique brand of jank, right?
Sure.
Like this is sort of what finding one's style is, right? Like I had a professor in grad school who used to say, like, artists find their style when they try to draw something else and they're bad at it, and then everyone says, "Oh, what an interesting style."
I love that.
That's awesome.
I love that.
Right. So like, there's some truth to that, but I do want to juxtapose that against this personal kind of philosophy that you're proposing of excellence. And I'm not trying to, I don't want to make any of us sound too snobbish with this. I mean, there is a virtue and a beauty to just going out and creating something for creation's sake. But something I do admire about you and any artist who takes this philosophy is that you aren't okay with just stopping there. Like you said, you do have kind of a higher standard for it. And going back to the competition video you did for Adobe, where, you were saying, I think you said they were good stories, but it wasn't good filmmaking. Like that's something that's missing a lot, right? Mm-hmm. Especially coming from like a religious background. And this isn't exclusive to Catholicism or Christianity at all, but most people are okay with the agenda or the moral, if they want to be kinder about it, or anything like that. Most people are okay with that carrying most of the weight, and the art and the technique and the effort kind of taking a back seat. And, again, that's not exclusive to religious circles, but I do think it's something that we have in common, that we all sort of come from that world. And I'm just curious. I mean, it's easy to say like, oh, I hold myself to a higher standard, but where do you think that comes from for you? And how do you, I guess, kind of a second question, this is going to give you a really long answer, but that's okay. Like the second question I have on that is, how do you hold yourself to that excellence without it becoming oppressive to you or snobbish or like breaking you in half with pressure or any of those kinds of things?
That's a great question. I think that the impulse to hold myself to that excellence is purely from insecurity. Just got to be real. Like
solid.
Just like being competitive, or like, I mean, when there was an art competition in kindergarten, it's like, I want to win that, so I'm going to work the hardest, not because I wanted to make beautiful art necessarily. So I think way deep down, there's just this drive to like, I want to be better and I want to work harder. That's the primal answer, but the evolved answer is that we only get one life, and I believe that God has put, whether they're gifts necessarily, in my heart, like God has put these desires or this attraction to art that only I can foster, only I can hone. That's not given to me at birth, even though my mother would tell you that. She has held on to every drawing I've had, and many of them are so terrible. But what's present is like, wow, I drew a lot. My mom took me to holy hours very, very often, and while at first they were, as a child, it felt like torture. Once she allowed me to bring my sketchbook, that's really where I could just iterate and iterate and iterate and iterate. And I was drawing saints, I was drawing the crucifixion, I was drawing all these things, like, and again, not great, but it was quantity. And I think that goes into your second question, where what stops it from getting oppressive? I don't linger very long on any one thing and try to make that perfect. I do have a high standard. I do want it to be as best as I can, but I know when that limit has been reached, I'm able to say, yep, that's my best. Moving on. And then the next time it's going to get better. I recently saw I quote this, there was a pottery class somewhere. I don't know. And the teacher divided the students into 2 groups and said, each of you are going to be graded differently throughout this semester. One of you is going to be graded on the quantity of pottery that you put out this whole semester. So if you produce 50 pounds of pottery, you get an A. 40 is a B, 30 is a C. So the more you do, the higher grade you get. And the other group was focused on the quality. It says, make the perfect piece of pottery. Can you guess which one advanced more and learned more?
It's quantity. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
Because if you don't allow yourself to make mistakes, if you don't not stop and move on, if you don't like call it and move on to the next thing, you will never learn from that last thing. So if you linger for so long, and that's such a pet peeve, especially here in LA. There's so many talkers. There's so many people who have this screenplay that they want to have made, and like, oh, dude, it's going to be like the next American classic. It's like, yeah, well, where is it? And right. I can identify with that because I was that when I first moved out here too. You know, I had this grand, lofty idea for this thing, and that wasted years of my life rather than iterating and practicing. So that's when I started making short films, you know, 1 minute to 2 minutes in length. And it's like, okay, this one can be weird. This one can be, it just allowed me to make mistakes. That's the negative way of seeing it, but it actually helped me improve. Rather than working on one thing for many years, I just did more and more and more and more. And that really helped to dull that sensation of like, everything has to be perfect. For me, it just has to be my best. And that's it.
Yeah.
And once you hit that, okay, then you can move on. Go to the next painting. Go to the next piece of music. Go to the next art form if you want to. Just keep moving.
Yeah, you know, that's a really interesting, like that. So what that brings to mind for me is, so like, okay, Monet, Claude Monet, everyone knows Monet. Okay, fine, great. But like, the funny thing about Monet is that when he was like 13 years old, he was his little French town's like prodigy caricaturist. He was this like legendary maker of like, you know, the kind of like late 18th and then into the 19th century caricatures, like political type caricatures that you see in like either like in the boring sections of museums that nobody goes to, you know, where like people with big heads and they have like little butterfly wings, and it's like they're usually like political commentaries or whatever.
My favorite parts of museums.
Yeah, the best part of museums, that and like the dumbass furniture. I mean, that and the wonderful furniture sections, which I love. Okay, so he was really good at this, and he was like 13, 14, 15. I mean, he was like a kid, you know, and he was producing these like amazing quality caricatures in this kind of like pen and paper, charcoal and paper style that was like simplistic, but like really like the best versions of this anybody had ever seen. And like, you know, so like the town mayor would like get his character done by like a little kid Monet, and like, and it was all really great and everybody loved it. And he was doing this all the time. So there's like, we have a ton of these still remaining actually, of like these kind of basically what you're describing, like these sketchbooks of these like continual iterations of like different kinds of caricatures, where you can tell he was just playing around. He was a kid, he's just playing around, you know. But then he was also making in the end like a fair amount of money by doing this, because he was just like, first he was a prodigy, but then he was like, actually, could you make my character, because, you know, I want one. So there's this weird, but the point with this is that there's this weird thing where like, now when you see these caricatures in a museum, and I happen to have the privilege of being able to go like an exhibit of his caricatures at one point, there's this weird kind of like breath, like holding your breath moment where you feel this weird pressure to like an alternative future or like an alternative past, where like, what if what if like 16-year-old Monet had just been like, lock it down. Like, I'm going to just like lock in this mode for the rest of my life. Like, I'm making money. This is great. You know, I'm just going to like lock into this caricature thing. There's a whole career of caricaturists, many talented artists and these kinds of things. That could have just been his career for the rest of his life. And he would have died probably a relatively prosperous and maybe even wealthy man. And literally nobody would know his name in the 21st century. But in his own period, he would have been famous and successful. But something wild happened, right? Which is like that like in this constant like iterative process, some sort of like total jump, like there was an invitation to like something totally different that wasn't actually possible except for this like constant iteration of this other art form. And then like suddenly, basically he had this thing of like, well, what if I did what we're going to call like impressionist style painting? That like gradually develops and then sort of explodes, and everyone forgets that there was ever this caricaturist Monet, including Monet. And like we have Shazam, like French Impressionism. So there is this about like, I just want to like underscore and emphasize that, because I think that's such a beautiful thing, what you were saying about that like, you do these things and you do these things and you do these things. And then like sometimes in ways that seem like causally unrelated, there can be like this invitation in life to accept this, like, or to press yourself, or to like move into something that's like a quantum leap, you know, that seems to be totally unrelated to what came before, but in fact is actually only really made possible by the thing that came before, and by being to like open to something new, however that might eventuate. So yeah, you know, so I just like, it's just interesting because in your own experience, like there is something of this, you know. So it's like, again, you could lock down and like you could like lock in as a video filmmaker and like and be comfortable with that, but like and you know, you're developing your techniques and that's fantastic. And then like along the way comes this invitation to something totally new, and like you've accepted it and it's making fantastic work.
I think the word that keeps ringing a bell in my head is that invitation. And I think a lot of people can see that as life kind of presenting those opportunities. But as far as what spiritual connection I kind of see in this, I've seen it in life, and I've seen it in my career and with work, is that whether you believe it's God or life itself opens some certain doors. And I am very well versed in trying to open doors that are not for me, or are just very narrow doors, or they're locked. They're not going to open just yet. And I have forced it and forced it and forced it, again, in life and in work. You know, I was pursuing acting for a while, and I was, come on, man, I got to make that work. Well, those doors aren't opening as much as you want them to. But the second I started walking through the doors that were starting to open, more doors started opening after that. And I think that you have to be in touch with that as a person and as an artist, to allow yourself to stop struggling and to don't try and make something work that just isn't. Obviously, working hard, be disciplined. Not every door is going to be easy to walk through, but it's weird, man. I just feel like certain doors have just opened and been like, okay, this is here. I'm not forcing you to walk through it. And when I have, abundance is on the other side. More opportunity, more fulfilling work. When you just see what it's so ethereal. It's so hard to explain, but I'm sure each of you has had what you were calling the invitation. You know, you can even call it vocation, the call. It's a decision you have to make, but there was an invite that was put out there.
I really want to be able to pivot the conversation soon into talking about the specific techniques you're using with cut paper and the limitations and the successes of it and all those things. But before we get to that, I mean, I just want to hit on something that I think is really important, that it's a struggle for a lot of artists that you're really touching on, which is that a lot of the time when you are having that kind of posture of yes towards these different doors being opened, you know, you end up, as you have, wearing many different hats. And in the sort of SEO powered version of the art world in which you and I, well, the three of us currently exist, that can be a really frustrating thing, right? Because other people are very eager to label the kind of art that you do. I mean, in case in point, you know, just for myself, right? Like I have theme park design buddies who, when they introduce me to people, will be like, oh, you know, Jacob used to be a psychotherapist and then he had a career change and is now doing art in the theme park world. And it's like, no, I've always tried to do both. Like, this is always both, right? Or you know, people will say, oh, he's an illustrator, and then get mad when I post, you know, a branding package that I did for some company or whatever, right? And like, people are very eager to sort of label what your portfolio is. And when you do more than one thing, it weirds them out because it weirds the SEO out. You know what I mean? It's hard to just throw all that on a business card. How do you personally balance just being Julian or being Righteous Robot and not being a graphic designer, a illustrator, a filmmaker?
Oh man, that's tough. I you know, I've gotten lucky that the doors have just kind of opened themselves, and I'm not having to go to knock on them and say, hi, I am a blank. The times when I really have to come up against that is mixers, cocktail parties, just answering
the networking events. Yeah.
Answering. So what do you do? I'm like, well,
so have you ever heard of paper?
Honestly, I have to think of just what did I do today? And that's, it's a conversation starter. I'm like, well, today I was making oil barrels out of rolls of paper. Today I was animating for a documentary. Today I was doing this. I never say artist just because that can be so pretentious, but I mean, this is all art. I generally just say filmmaker.
I'm an artisan. I'm a craftsman.
I think filmmaker kind of allows me to encompass all those things, and then I let the job or the person kind of figure out more from there. You know, every job has different needs, and I can bring various skills to that job, to that assignment, and I kind of let the job dictate what I can offer and bring to the table. So, you know, I make my own films in my own time, but when I'm on another job, you know, I don't have say on the edit or as much in like the final product. It's like, okay, my stuff is just a piece of that final product. And I will offer what I can. So I always allow myself to have my life experience, my various skills just as tools in my tool belt. And as a filmmaker, as a freelancer, those are at the client's disposal should they need them. You know, my experience in this, my insight into that. So yeah, I just see them all as, the fancy way would be different colors on my palette. That it's like, these are things that can help bring your piece to life and that I can bring to the table.
That's great.
So with that in mind, let's talk about the stuff that you're actually physically bringing to the literal table in terms of these pieces of cut paper that you're working with. Talk us through like the actual process of this from beginning to end when you're starting to work on, maybe not a full short film, because that's more time than we have, but like when you're actually, building the subcomponents or whatever, what's the process you're bringing to that, both technically and also spiritually and in terms of ideation and all those kinds of things?
Sure. I'm definitely figuring this out as I go. I never claim to be an expert in anything. I'm just iterating. So the methods that I've used in this short film Gruff that I'm working on right now, it's probably going to be 5-ish minutes long. Okay. And I've completed about 1.5 minutes of it. And my techniques and approaches have changed since the first scene to the last scene. You wouldn't quite know because what you see is staying the same, but I've streamlined build processes. I've streamlined my post-production processes. I've learned a lot more. My gear is making it easier for me. So again, what you see shouldn't change. There's a cohesion that remains throughout, but there's no one way yet that I'm doing things literally scene to scene. Like, it was really hard to like puppeteer someone like by putting my hand through this window and like doing this, like my arm got really sore. So the next time I do that, I'm just going to take that whole wall down and add it in later in post-production. It's like, okay, that just makes my job easier. So it's kind of its own evolving beast. But simply speaking, at this point, there are these handmade metal skeletons that I use that basically act as the whiteboard where you can magnetically place things on top of. So I used to make these paper puppets only out of paper, where the mechanics were even made out of paper. Like the neck was made of paper, and that paper neck had to hold up a big paper head. And that was starting to really, that was not sustainable. And those figures were deteriorating after, one day of puppeteering. So that quickly iterated to, okay, the paper has to be the aesthetic, and anything behind it is what really has to do the work. So that's when I moved into making these metal armatures that were the clothesline that you could just put the faces on, put the clothes on.
And you're making those yourself? The metal armatures, yes. You're welding all that shit?
I'm not welding. It's just cutting them. Like, you get a good pair of tin snips and it's like cutting wrapping paper.
Oh, really?
Okay. All right.
Oh, yeah. So, yeah, you get these sheets of, I think it's like 26 gauge steel from Home Depot or something, tin snips, and you just make thin strips. I have like a metal puncher, screw them together, just nuts and bolts. And what's really cool about that approach is that, and I'm kind of borrowing from the stop motion world as well, and a lot of like Leica and Aardman and stuff post so much cool behind the scenes footage for a lot of their films that I just, oh man, I drink that up. And what's cool is that you can like loosen and tighten certain joints. So if their legs have to be like totally mounted to the ground, but this arm is what's doing the emoting, since now I have those on nuts and bolts, I can loosen the wrist to be super flexible, the elbow to be a little bit more rigid, and then the shoulder to be the most, so that I can get this kind of motion if I attach a rod here, but the rest of the body can stay still. Whereas if everything was made out of paper, everything has the same like pliability, which didn't give me a lot of like performance control. So yeah, that metal structure allows for that, but also magnets have really become a huge part of the workflow. Like a lot of the stop motion ones, like they screw them into the ground, which is great. That's very secure, but the ground of all of my sets, I take one of those sheets of metal, and I use that as the ground, and then put like the textured, whether it's a carpet or like a wood floor on top of it. And their feet have really, 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 really strong like earth magnets on them. So I can just pop them onto the set and they're locked on.
Okay.
And it's easy to move them around. And the puppet rods that I use are sometimes just like extendable magnet. Like it's for catching screws, like in the back of your workshop or something. But since there's metal like on the back of their hand or like on the back of their head, I can reach down into the set and kind of puppeteer them that way with magnets. And that's kind of how I'm doing it now. That might change for the next scene. I don't know.
Is there a particular kind of paper you're using, or what are you like tactile or textile wise? What are you choosing for the stuff that people actually see?
Primarily watercolor paper, just the basic stuff from your average arts and crafts store. It's like the Strathmore watercolor paper. Yeah, it's got a really pretty texture when you see it in close up on camera, that not the crosshatched side, but like the smoother side. I don't know. It almost looks like the pores of skin or something. But then I use the reverse side that has that like weave texture that watercolor paper has for if I'm doing clothes. So I'll paint that and like it kind of mimics the weave of actual fabric. But then, you know, places like Michael's or whatnot have like a whole paper section that have fun textures. Like some have glitter or just, I don't know. I'm always on the hunt for papers with different textures, but the main bread and butter for most of this is that watercolor paper, because it can really be bent into shape. It's pliable, but it's still firm. So that's the faces, the hands, like most of the body parts, stuff like that.
Yeah, I love that there's the material character of the thing itself is like shaping some of the possibilities of the art form and its like storytelling techniques, which is a really interesting thing. You know, like one thing that, I mean, you alluded to a little bit at the very beginning, but like, you know, an obvious question for anybody, just because everyone's so used to like, oh yeah, I did this like fully digital thing and then like added some you know, paper effects afterwards or whatever, which is not to make fun of. Jacob does a lot of this stuff for our aesthetic, which is like super amazing, and I love it, you know. But like, but there you have different, like there's different limitations that are like creating the structures of possibility. And like I find that really interesting, the way that even just like, yeah, like what is the physical character of the paper that you've been able to find, and the way that like these are limitations, but it's these limitations that actually create the zones of possibility for the way for your expression, for like the expression of your mode of the mode of art that you're using. I don't know. I would love, like, that's just some initial reflections from just thinking from what I've seen, from what you shared on your Instagram, like, why does this impress me? Like, why is this obviously different than something that's been digitally generated, or whatever? I'd be a little curious about your own thoughts about that, like about just sort of like, what do you feel like, even that just the very, I mean, literally tactile physicality of like, well, you use this paper with this kind of nap and this kind of weave. Like, how are you aware of that opening up or limiting your storytelling ability, your emotive ability, your acting ability for the work that you're doing?
Well, I think, Jacob, you were talking earlier, a professor, I think you said in grad school, saying that like when you copy someone's art,
you find your style by copying someone else's poorly. Yeah.
And then everyone else is like, oh wow, look at that style. It's like, well, I guess that's me now.
Yeah, what a style.
That is totally the mentality for this project, because I look at these studios that create the beautiful stop motion work, and they 3D print every single facial expression, you know, 12 3D printed masks per second that can show
what?
Man, look at that, the range of expressions that they can do, and like the camera moves that they can achieve. And even in the building of these puppets, it's like, well, they're not fully 3D. It's like that 2.5D, because like I kind of round their faces a little bit so that you can catch light, and there's some real shadows. It's not just like a drawing that I'm putting on camera. But starting out, there was so much insecurity of like, oh, I'm so limited. Like, this is cool. And this is before I showed anybody anything, while I was still just sitting at this table. Like, what am I doing? Is this dumb? Like, has anyone done this before? I don't really know. Just folding things, looking at how they behaved in the light. And for example, like with hands, I'm like, well, the hand is such a complicated thing. And, you know, I had some like dolls and references when I was storyboarding the whole thing to like pose them. And I'm like, I wish I could like look at the hand of this action figure that I was using as reference. Like how easy would it be to like just have an action figure hand for these figures? Like, it's fully 3D and I can get that full. So the limitations that I felt the most were that lack of depth and that lack of dimensionality, that I worked really hard to work that depth into layering what the eye saw, what the camera saw, and accentuating that with like really nice lighting, showing like, okay, there is, yes, this is paper, but there's so many layers to it, even within the face, like working from the outside, like the lips are one thing, then it's the face, the nose is a separate piece, but then that's cut out and then there's an eye plate behind that. And if it's a female figure, there's eyelids that have to go behind the eye plate, but the eyelash has to go over the face plate. And engineering all these layers to be like, all right, yes, it is flat and it's paper, but I'm really going to try and push and get as many layers as possible through it. And so that amount of iteration came from my insecurity with the limitations, because I was so frustrated. Like, I just want to pop this hand off the action figure and put that in the movie. And when I was in the early stages of all this, like I made, I'm definitely like Sid from Toy Story. I've always been like taking toys apart and stuff. And I had this toy collection that, like I said, I was using to kind of like, to help me illustrate the storyboards for this short film. And the heads I made out of clay, like the baking clay, like just so I could see
like
what,
Sculpey.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I could see what they looked like in 3 dimensions and do a turnaround and stuff. And holding that, I'm like, how much easier is it to just have an actual 3-dimensional head? Like, because my characters, if they turn completely to the side, like the illusion is broken. So my front-facing puppets can only do a little bit like this before I have to make a whole nother puppet that's in profile. So I'm like, that's like 3 times the work. I need a puppet that's facing this way. I need one that's facing this way. And I need one that's front, maybe even some 3/4 ones. So I'm like, is this a silly solution? Like, it would be so much easier if it was one 3-dimensional head that I just puppeteer to do that. And it turns out that people really dig this 2.5D thing, and like that flatness and depth, like, is what makes this unique. It would be so much easier to animate an action figure that is fully 3D. And they sell like doll clothes and all that stuff like in that scale. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I could order furniture pieces. I can order plants that are in that scale. Like, it would be so much easier for me. But if I decided to go down that path, maybe people wouldn't be as like emotionally invested into it, because it's just dolls and action figures on a set. And there's nothing wrong with that, but like, I accidentally stumbled into this. Well, I guess I have to make every freaking blade of grass in this movie. If there's a tree in the distance, I need to make that tree. And I need to put the same like love and attention into a book that is on a shelf in the background of a shot as I do to the eyes of the main character. And that's a lot of work and it's exhausting. But now I'm realizing that that's what people dig about it, is like, nothing is store-bought on camera. Every single thing is handmade. The wood on the floor is hand-cut strips of crepe paper. Everything is handmade. And again, that was accidental. That came from me lusting after these incredible 3D shapes that Leica is doing, and Aardman has done. Being like, man, that must be so nice to not have to do a whole new puppet just to do that. But it's kind of become its own style now, like you said, Jacob.
I do think your success, and this is just purely theory on my part, but I do suspect that your success is part of a larger kind of zeitgeist movement towards what I'm douchily calling kind of a renaissance of tactility.
Oh, I hope so.
Because like, especially with the advent of AI, which, you know, Brother Gabriel and I have been talking for a while about how do we do an episode that even begins to tackle that. But especially with that, you know, you're seeing that digital art is becoming more and more populist, right? Like it's easier and easier to do. I mean, even with the sculpture references that you're talking about, I mean, and this is no knock on studios like Leica. I mean, they're doing incredible work, but in theory, if you got enough money, anybody can buy a 3D printer and then just kind of get models online and start printing, right? So the ability to kind of create is becoming more and more proliferated and more populist. And so things that are just, oh, I'm actually doing this all from scratch by hand, I think are going to become and are actively becoming much more sought after because they stand out more. They're obviously harder to achieve, right? And they might not look quote unquote better, but that's what makes them more interesting. Do you find that, I'm trying to find the right words to this question, but do you find the tactility? I mean, you said you hope so. Is the tactility of this part of what attracts you to what you're doing here? I mean, is that part of the fun for you, that it isn't that clean anymore?
Totally. Yeah, I have so many thoughts on that because in that iteration period where I was like, oh, should the figures just be sculpey like heads, and should I order clothes and all that? Phase 2 was, okay, I'm going to hand paint all watercolor paper, like all my turnarounds, all my angles, scan them into the computer and rig them in the computer. So they were all still going to be hand done illustrations, but I actually had committed weeks to doing it that way, thinking that I was going to bring all the elements and layer them in the computer. So the joints would be digital joints. So I drew forearms, I drew hands, like all these different angles. So I thought, well, that's bringing the illustrative quality that I want to it. And I didn't even do a motion test. There's a scene that in the short film that shows a bunch of photographs on the wall. So I have to go in and make every single one of those. And even when I was just layering the faces and like combining the joints and this and that to make those photos that are in the background, I was like, man, this is not giving me what I thought, even though these are all handmade. Like a scanner blasts the image with light. Like there's no depth to it. And, in programs you can cast like shadows and make it look like there's an edge and all that stuff. I mean, but I'm like, it's already, I lost something when I scanned it. And so I cut one of those faces out, and that's when I kind of had that eureka moment, and I bent it. And I'm like, oh, wow, look at how it catches the light. This is the thing that has to be on camera. It's not about scanning them. I need to make fully layered puppets, I guess, and do it in camera, because the way that the light is capturing these is so much better than anything I could learn in After Effects. And then obviously that just tickled my love for practical filmmaking. And I'm like, oh, I'm going to be so proud to say that everything that you see on camera exists in the physical world. I still, again, have to do a lot of compositing. Like I said, that one time where I like fly away a wall just so my hand can get in there. But when when I put that wall back in, that was a photographed wall. That's a real wall. There's nothing artificial about that. And as far as how it pertains to paper, what I have found to be an asset is that like paper is something that we interact with pretty much on a daily basis, whether it's in your mail, what your Starbucks cup is made out of, your napkins, paperwork at work, like more so than even clay. I haven't touched clay since I was a kid, really, like Play-Doh or I guess I made those plasticine heads or those clay heads, but that's not something that people really have lying around too much. So as far as paper specifically goes, it's like, oh, wow, that's made out of the stuff that I interact with every day. And there is a beautiful, I could do that quality about it. I've never knocked the experience of walking into even a modern art gallery and people being like, oh, I can do that. I say that, and then I go home and I do it, and then I have that art in my house for not $10 million. I like that.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
There's a beauty in seeing something like the Sistine Chapel and being like, nope, I can't do that. And there's a respect and a reverence for something like that. But I also like looking at things and being like, I could probably do that. And then doing it. It's really fun. And I think that is what has always attracted me in just filmmaking in general. You know, that peaked in the like mid to late 90s, early 2000s, kind of ended with Lord of the Rings, in my opinion, of just like, oh, wow, that's like real armor. Like I can reach out and touch that. Like that's a real orc in a prosthetic mask. Like I'm watching a filmed event. Of course, it's all fake, but like I am watching a photographed event. I can reach out and touch it. And with all this being paper, I think these are complicated. I won't say like you can just easily pick it up and do it, but some people have tried and they've sent me like replica puppets of what I've done. And I'm like, that's when you know it's striking. That's when you know you've hit a gold. It's like when a fan is reaching out and being like, I can make that. And this girl in Japan sent me a video of like a replica puppet in the movie My Dad. And she was doing like the little blinking mechanism that I did. And I'm like, that's what art is about. It's not about the gatekeeping. And that's why I'm really trying to share my process. And people ask, oh man, you got to patent that shit. And I'm like, no, the story is what's unique to me. And yeah, my approach is, I guess, kind of new, but someone's going to take that and run with it and make something way cooler. And then I'm going to steal that from them. And then someone's going to steal that from them. And then the advantage of that is we all get better art in the long run when we share. I don't want to go to my grave with these techniques because then they'll never evolve. So I think it's so cool that people feel like they can reach out and grab it and start folding and like coloring and making paper puppets of their own. Because that's how we get new things. So.
Yeah. I think that's really cool. And like, you know, one of the, you were reflecting earlier about like sort of like coveting these action figure hands because they're just because hands are just like so impossible, you know. I just read this novel by I think he's an Austrian writer named Thomas Bernhardt, called The Old Masters, and in it, like one of the characters is like sitting in the famous art museum here in Vienna, which has all these old masters in it, you know, and he's this sort of like crotchety old guy, and like he's just like complaining about all the old masters and like tearing down their reputations. And one thing he says is like, in this whole museum, like you can't find a single person who can paint a hand. He's like, you will go through the whole museum, you won't find a single hand, you know, you'll just find a bunch of like weird appendages. And it's like, okay, which is hilarious. But it's great to like emphasize like just how incredibly hard hands are for like any kind of reproduction because they're just really that hard. Which is extra cool because one of these behind the scenes videos that you're talking about, that you've produced yourself, is it gives like a 15-second introduction to like how you making one of your hands for one of your figures, which is marvelous. Like it's marvelous to see like all this, just like the painstaking labor and the detail and the way these things work. And of course, like, I mean, it looks like a puppet hand, you know, like a drawn puppet hand. That's the whole point. It's not supposed to look naturalistic.
Stylized.
Yeah, it's stylized. It's mannerized, it's stylized. It's not supposed to look like a photorealism kind of thing. Which is great. I'm glad it doesn't. That would be creepy, actually. But you know what it made me think about when I saw that video, and then like hearing you reflect on your own creative process, and it's like increasingly kind of like crowd source or crowd shared characteristic, is like what to me what that video made me think of was like there's this very important like general artistic and creative principle that like I hold to very strongly, which is that like nothing takes as much work and is as hard and is as artificial as being natural. Because like those like the end result of that hand looks like so natural, like it looks so natural, just like, oh, it had to look that way. Of course, like it's got these like these like sort of the joints and the shadows and the textures. You say like, oh, that's just the totally natural way. If anybody was going to make a hand out of paper, of course it was going to look like that. But this is the result of like for it, because that's the artistic moment. Like that's the connection, whether it's like music or whether it's visual art or whether it's a hybrid medium like what you're working with. Like that's where you know you succeeded, is when somebody looks at it and says like, well, of course it has to look like that. Well,
oh wow,
of course it has to look like that.
That's pretty cool.
It's like taking 3 hours to make your hair look like you just rolled out of bed in the morning.
Yeah, exactly. Sure. Like it just looks like this. It just, I just wake up like this, Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Like nothing, nothing is as hard as totally being natural, right. And like, I mean, I'm a preacher and this is something I think about a lot with preaching, is that like everyone says to, or many people, most priests and deacons would say to themselves like, well, I just want to sound natural when I'm up in the pulpit. And they think that means without artifice, which is the falsest possible thing, because it takes the most artifice and the most skill to be able to like harness everything that a human being can produce so with such skill that it seems as if it just came out that way. I was like, well, of course you had to say it that way. Of course you had to articulate the joints that way. Of course you had to draw it that way. It's just so natural.
Yeah, no, that's very honored that you feel that way. I've never thought about that as like a possible end goal, to make something look effortless. I think as someone with very curly hair, Jacob's analogy resonated with me. You're like, oh man, shit takes some work.
Exactly.
No, that's fascinating, because and I think a lot of people get intimidated when they see it and are like, oh, that's so natural. Like, of course, that phrase that you're saying, like, of course it had to look like that. And a lot of people see that or experience that possibly by listening to a sermon, listening to a great work of music. I'm like, I could never do that. And that's why it's so important for me not to gatekeep and to share that, like, I am still figuring this out. The hands in the first scene were not made that well, but now I can do it really quick and easily. And like it is a process. And the only way that you can get to that natural, like, oh, I woke up like this kind of thing, is by practice and playing and experimenting. Especially, and I know you guys talk about art a lot and in various forms. So I think that this applies to everything, kind of going back to that smashing things together mentality that we were talking about earlier, but also that sense of play. Like, just try it. Yeah, try it upside down. Try it in that like god-awful color, because it might work. Try that weird texture. Try that dissonant note. When you approach things to just confirm your own bias, whether that's, politically, culturally, and in this case, artistically, of like, well, I just want the hands to look like this. You will only ever seek out work that confirms your ideology. But if you're okay putting things, like turning things upside down, you have no idea what you can discover. And that was that moment for me of taking all these scanned images that I had done, cutting them up, bending them, and being like, there's a strange beauty to this. And I never would have done that if I had kept forcing that closed door, that locked door. It's like, this isn't really working. No, I'm going to make it work. I'm going to make it work. Cut it up, fold it, turn it upside down, and something beautiful might be waiting for you on the other side. And that's that open door.
That's amazing. Yeah. I as always, even thinking about the absolutely cutting edge, like brand new stuff that you're doing, makes me think about the 13th century. And one of my favorite early Dominicans, a man named Humbert of Romans. He was not Roman, but he was from Romain. He wrote this important treatise on he's a Dominican, right? He wrote this like great treatise on preaching in like the 1250s, and in it he says he's like, why isn't all you young Turks, like, you don't want to, everyone wants to be a great preacher, but they suck. And why is that? And he says, because nobody learns Latin except for making a ton of mistakes. And so nobody can be a great preacher unless he makes a ton of mistakes and is willing to keep falling and then eventually become good. And like, I think this is just a thing more broadly considered, you know? And with that, I feel like I could sort of dig into this sort of all day, but I want to kind of bring our time together to a close. What we'd like to do in sort of in reflecting on this is to actually point to exactly the thing that you've been talking about, which is that this is not just that, you know, Julian Curi is a brilliant guy, not just that he's whatever, some sort of genius with paper, but that this thing that you've discovered that like is drawing your love and is drawing your time is also an invitation to each of us, like to me, to Jacob, to our listeners, to sort of dig into these things themselves, to have that freedom to iterate and iterate and iterate and iterate, to like allow themselves to discover, to hear the invitation, to like recognize where an invitation isn't, and to see an invitation and be willing to follow it where it might actually be, and to have the courage to actually see where that's going to go with all of its labor and all of its arduousness. So I'd say for everybody who's listening, definitely check out Julian Curi, check out his Instagram at Righteous Robot. Check out this amazing work that he's doing. Check out this awesome GoFundMe. And Gruff, yes. Gruff, yes. GoFundMe, which is almost its goal. So just push over that last little limit. But above all, like, think about the things that you're doing. Think about the things that attract your interest, that have drawn your heart, that like make you want to just keep getting your hands in it and on it again and again and again and again, and see where that will lead you. See where it will press, where you can press your luck, and what doors will open, what invitations you can hear, and what new things that you can do. So with that, go forth and create cool things.
Amen.
This has been Created Things, a production of Art, Soul, and Mind, hosted by Jacob Flores-Popchak and Father Gabriel Torretta, produced by Kyle Meineke and Jessica Flores-Popchak. Theme song by Federico Carranza. For more on this podcast and the artists featured, follow us on Instagram at Created Things Podcast, and subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, and wherever fine podcasts are streamed.